And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host Demo, and this is my Reidane and Sigrid deck tech. Now I know what you're going to say, but Demo, Reidane and Sigrid aren't partner commanders. And you would be correct. I went back and forth on this one a lot. When I saw Sigrid, I was like, okay, it's a little underwhelming, but it's interesting. I like commanders that are interesting, and we've never seen one like it before. And even though there are cards like Sigrid, we've never actually seen a commander like that before, really. And then I saw Reidane, and when Reidane was spoiled, I fell in love with it immediately. And I'm not going to go into the whole tax versus stacks thing. Go watch my Redane spoiler video, or go watch my quick take on tax versus stacks. Reidane is not a stacks commander. He is a tax commander. And I like tax effects. It really slows down. If you think about all the, nuts commanders that have just come out in this last set, seeing something like Reidane that's going to slow people down a little bit, I'm totally on board for that. So I saw Reidane and I was going to make a Reidane deck. And I thought about a Reidane deck and I thought about a Sigrid deck. And I realized that both decks probably are going to be very similar builds. So I thought, okay, well, I like Reidane more, so I'll just go with Reidane. And Sigrid, oh well, too bad, so sad. Then I saw a couple different commander channels who remain nameless, sort of poo-pooing on Sigrid and talking about how she's basically useless and unplayable. And that really, I'm big on the underdog, and I really like making decks and playing with commanders that other people think are awful. So I'm back on the Sigrid bandwagon. So I thought, why not try something new and do a dual deck tech? So basically what this is I'm doing a Reidane deck tech and a Sigrid deck tech at the same time, because about 50-60% of the deck is going to be the same anyway. And the reason that is because both decks are going to be playing the get off me bro sort of strategy. I don't want to call it pillow fort necessarily, because you can't really do a mono white pillow fort very well, but it is, for different reasons. Reidane, because it has that aura of being a tax or stacks commander, people are going to attack you for that reason, I think. Sigrid for a different reason. Sigrid, I thought about Sigrid, and it's going to be very interesting having Sigrid in the command zone. I heard someone say that it wasn't a very good combat trick because people can see it coming, but maybe we can play that to our advantage. Maybe people seeing Sigrid, you think about it, you're sitting at a table, some guy has Sigrid in the command zone. Gonna attack that person? Probably not, right? The other interesting thing is you can use this on any attacking creature or any blocking creature, so it doesn't have to be someone attacking you. So there's a lot of politics you can play there as well. So I'm going to start out with the cards that are in both decks, right? So Sphere of Safety and Ghostly Prison, obviously, this is a pillow fort and also tax sort of strategy. It works in both decks. It's going to be in both decks, obviously. I also have Comeuppance and Settle the Wreckage. Two of my favorite cards, especially in mono white. These are blowouts sometimes. Some of my favorite plays are the guy swings all out with his huge army, thinking the game is over, and you settle the wreckage. My favorite play of all time is with Comeuppance, where if you've seen any of my videos about disliking Aetherflux Reservoir, Comeuppance works with anything. It's not just for creatures. And I had this very cocky individual who is doing exactly what I said in my video about banning Aetherflux Reservoir, where he was hanging it over everyone's head, and I basically sort of called him out, and he paid 50 life, which brought him down to about 30, and then the Comeuppance reflected that damage back on him, and he ended up dying instead of killing me. It's probably my favorite play of all time. So two really great cards that I like a lot. I have Angel of the Dire Hour, which is going to be similar to Sigrid and that strategy, but is also going to be good with Reidane because we're going to be getting targeted a lot. I have Condemn, which is just a great card to keep people off of you. And once you start playing this strategy, I think that people will be like, oh, all right, let's concentrate on someone else because I'm sick and tired of losing all my creatures. I really like Stalking Leonin. This is a card that really didn't see a lot of play. It saw a little bit of play when Commander 2017 came out, and then it kind of didn't. I really like, again, it's just like with Sigrid, it's a card that you're going to put on the table and people aren't really sure. And if you're not sure, if you're not sure, you're probably not going to attack that person, right? People don't know what opponent has been named, so they're not going to attack you because they don't want to risk losing their creature. Soul Snare is another one that has been around for a long, long time that doesn't see a lot of play anymore. I think it's still really good. Again, it's another card that people are just going to leave you alone because they don't want to risk losing their creature. And then as far as the lands, Corehaven and Maze of Ith are fantastic. Again, more cards. A lot of times people have a Maze of Ith just sitting in play, and you'll be like, oh, how come you're not attacking that guy? And he's like, he's got a Maze of Ith, so what's the point? Like, they're not going to waste their attack on a guy who has a Maze of Ith, right? And that guy ends up just not ever getting attacked just because he has a Maze of Ith sitting in play. Again, all of these cards are in both decks. This is in the Sigrid deck. This is in the Reidane deck, both of them. Rebuff the Wicked. I gush over this card quite a bit. I've said in the past I put it in all my mono white decks. I even put it in a lot of decks that aren't, like my Orzhov decks, I'll put it in as well. Crackdown, another card that used to get played a lot, never does anymore. If you're playing a mono white deck, this doesn't hurt you at all, right? Because it's only non-white creatures. And all it's going to do is tap down all of the big non-white creatures in play that your opponents have. It's almost an auto-include in a white deck. Works great in both of our decks. Even Mind Sensor, Thalia. Okay, now we're kind of getting into the stuff where we are shutting our opponents down a little bit, right? This is more to the Reidane side, but also it's just good to not allow your opponents to search their libraries. It's good to, have your opponents, especially, I like Thalia mostly because of hasty creatures. That hasty Craterhoof kind of attack that comes out of nowhere, that shuts that down. So these are just really good cards in any deck, especially in a mono white deck, and they're going to be in both of these decks. I have Stonecloaker, okay, in both decks. In both decks, it works differently, right? In the Sigrid deck, it's obvious what you want to be doing there, right? You want to pick your Sigrid up so that you can use it again. In the Reidane deck, though, Reidane is double-sided, right? So if we play the Reidane side and we want to pick it up and play the shield side, we can do that with Stonecloaker, right? You really want to have any of these sort of effects. If you have, I've said this before, any MDFC commander, you got to have an effect where you can get your one side off the table. So if you want to play the other side, so Stonecloaker can do that. Skyclave Apparition, I've been gushing about this card a lot lately too. It's just so good. It answers so many different things. It's similar to Generous Gift, just an auto include in any mono white deck just because you can answer anything with it. And then I have Cosmos Elixir. This is, this was in my top 20 Kaldheim cards. We're going to be probably high on life because we're not going to be attacked a lot. So I imagine we'll be at 40 life when we play this. So the first time we play, at the beginning of that first end step, we'll just gain 2 life and then we can start drawing cards. I like cards that just sit there and do stuff for you and you don't have to put anything into them. They just sit there and draw you cards, right? And then how are we going to win? It's going to be a little bit different with either deck, okay? So Approach to the Second Sun is going to be great for both decks just because we are keeping people off of us. And when we cast that first Approach to the Second Sun, people are going to be like, oh, we better kill them. But because our deck is keeping people off of us, it's going to be tough for them to do. So that's going to be a possible win con for both decks. Elish Norn is just a good card. This shuts down a lot of what our opponents are doing. Especially in the Sigrid deck, we're going to be attacking a little bit more. In the Reidane deck, less so. But in the Sigrid deck, we're going to be attacking a lot more, so just beefing up our creatures, like we can just close out the game that way. Krovak's Ascended Hero is sort of a lesser Elish Norn, right? It is going to it gives all white creatures +1/+1, but I imagine that's not going to help our opponents a whole lot. It's going to help us more. And then you also have that, non-white creatures, which is none of our creatures, are going to get -1. So it's sort of like a mini Elish Norn. So that's going to be good for helping to close out the game. Tyrite Sanctum, another card that I really, really liked from Kaldheim. This goes in a lot of decks. This is an auto-include in a lot of decks. The interesting thing is it's an auto-include in both of our decks here, but does completely different things. So in our Reidane deck, obviously Reidane is a god. And we're just going to immediately sacrifice our Tyrite Sanctum to make him indestructible. That's just going to be great. We have a 2/3 flying vigilance indestructible creature that can just block everything and still attack. That's going to be fantastic for us. In our Sigrid deck, though, and I mentioned this when I did my review of all the lands from Kaldheim, Sigrid has protection from god creatures. So what you can do is you can use that first ability, target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types. You're going to put a +1/+1 counter on your opponent's creature, but you can turn any legendary creature, like their commander, into a god. And once you do that, now your Sigrid has protection from their commander or protection from whatever legendary creature they have. So any creature that your opponents have, you can basically give your Sigrid protection from. That's going to be really handy for us. Okay, now we're going to separate. Okay, those are all the cards that go in both decks. Now we're going to focus on just certain decks, all right? So for the Redane deck, we are going to put Archon of Emeria in there because, again, we're playing a little bit more of the tax style in a Redane deck. So, and Archon of Emeria is just fantastic. Blind Obedience is another one that is sort of an auto-include in a lot of decks of this style. A lot of decks just play Blind Obedience, period. Life Gain decks will play it a lot of time because it has Extort. I like Consulate Crackdown. We have a lot of artifacts and enchantments. So we don't want to hit our own artifacts if we can help it. This is just going to exile all of our opponent's artifacts. It's completely a hose and artifact deck. Force Field. This one is really, really good in that Redane deck. Okay, so if you look at the shield side, Valkmira, right? If a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent one of that damage. So what we can do is Force Field, right? So the next time a unblocked creature would deal combat damage to you this turn, prevent all but one of that damage. Now, I'm quite certain this is how it works. I could be wrong. Like, this is just a good card in the deck anyway. However, what we can do, I'm quite certain this works. Maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, but our opponent's swinging in with a big creature. We use a Force Field, and we're going to prevent all but one of that damage. So that creature is going to deal 1 damage, and then the Valkmira is going to kick in when they deal that 1 damage, and it's going to prevent 1 of that damage, which means it's going to do 0 damage. So as far as I know, if we have Force Field and we have Valkmira in play, we can prevent all damage from attacking unblocked creatures our opponents control. Could be wrong, I'm not sure, but hopefully that works. Karmic Justice. This is a card that people put in enchantment tribal decks a lot. I guess just because it is an enchantment, but it's so good in any deck where you just want to be protecting non-creature permanents. This should be in every Atraxa Super Friends deck, right? Because it keeps people from destroying your planeswalkers, right? Any spell or ability that an opponent controls that destroys a non-creature permanent you control, you may destroy target permanent that opponent controls. Again, this is like a ghostly prison for all your permanents, right? It just prevents people from touching your stuff. They don't want to touch your stuff because then you're going to destroy something of theirs. And we have lots of artifacts and enchantments in this deck that we want people to keep their hands off of. One of them is Meekstone. Meekstone is, again, it's in our Redane deck because we are playing more of the, tapping down our creatures. You think about Blind Obedience, right? That big creature is going to come into play tapped, and then if we have Meekstone, it's not even going to untap, so they're never going to have a chance to use it. So that's going to be great in this deck. Orbs of Warding is another card that, it's going to give us hexproof. It's going to, again, prevent more. That's more damage that's going to be prevented. So if we have Orbs of Warding and our Valkmira out, we will prevent 2 damage from every creature that attacks. I have Recruiter of the Guard in this deck because there is the last card I'm going to talk about in my Redane deck is probably the best card in the deck, and I can get it with Recruiter of the Guard. That's why I put it in here, and that is Selfless Squire. Selfless Squire is going to be doing what we want to do, which is just keeping people away from us, right? So typically when Selfless Squire enters the battlefield, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So it's sort of like a fog, but then whenever damage that would be dealt to you is prevented. So this effect, that second effect, is always on. Okay, it's not a one-time thing. It's always turned on. Whenever damage that would be dealt to you is prevented, put that many +1/+1 counters on Selfless Squire. So essentially what you typically do is you cast this after you've been attacked. You cast it during combat. You take, 10 damage, and then you put, that all gets prevented, and then you put that many counters on your Selfless Squire, and it gets huge. So if Valkmira is in play, it's going to be preventing damage all the time. Any damage that gets prevented to us is going to put a counter on Selfless Squire. So those 2 cards just work so good together. Should also note, Sigrid is in the Redane deck. and Reidane is in the Sigrid deck. So they are going to be in each other's decks. So that is important to note. So the first card I thought of with Sigrid is Containment Priest. And again, if you watched my Livio and Sakashima deck, that deck is sort of built around this too, but I really wanted to exile a creature and I don't want them to get it back, right? And if Containment Priest is on the battlefield, they won't get their creature back when Sigrid leaves the battlefield because it will be entering the battlefield without being cast, so it'll stay in exile. So that's going to be great in this deck. And we can do it with Flash, or we can just leave it on the battlefield and just do this whenever we feel like it. Hollowed Moonlight is a one-shot like that, right? So our Sigrid is about to get removed from the battlefield. You know, someone's casting a board wipe. We can quickly Hollowed Moonlight, and then that creature that would have come back into play when Sigrid died is going to stay in exile. Pull from Eternity. This is a neat little trick. I've done this in a few different decks, right? We can exile that creature. So we cast our Sigrid, exile their giant attacking creature, and then it's in exile, and Pull from Eternity will put that face-up card that is in exile. So we're just going to put that card in their graveyard. So it's not going to come back when Sigrid leaves the battlefield. So just another neat little trick. And Reidane, we just want to return to our hand if we want to flip it. Sigrid, we want to return to our hand so we can keep reusing that ability. So Erratic Portal, I think, is really good. This is a card we can use on our opponents too. This is a great card. You know, again, it's sort of a Staxy effect in a way, because your opponents basically have to leave one mana open all the time, or else you'll just start bouncing all their creatures. This is another card that used to get used in Commander a lot back in the day and not so much anymore. We can just use this on ourselves. We can just pay one mana, return our Sigrid to our hand, that if we want to use it again immediately. Shepherd of the Flock is another way we can do this, right? Return target permanent you control to owner's hand. This is actually a pretty good card. 1 mana at instant speed to save any permanent of yours that you don't want destroyed. That's pretty good. You know, obviously in white, there's not a ton of effects like this. So Admonition Angel is another card that, you know, this can just be good for us because we can use those landfall triggers to solve our problems and get rid of stuff we don't like in play. Any permanent, right? Any non-land permanent that we don't want to play, we can temporarily get rid of. But if Admonition Angel is about to die, we cast that Hollowed Moonlight, or we cast that Containment Priest, so our opponents don't get any of their stuff back. I have Selfless Spirit in this deck. I didn't put it in the Reidane deck because there's not a lot of creatures, right? There's 23 creatures in the Sigrid deck. We're relying more on the attacking strategy in this deck. So I put Selfless Spirit in here to protect our creatures. Also have Mirran Crusader, just because it's a fantastic, you know, protection from black and green, which are like the 2 most popular colors in the format. Again, another card that used to get played a lot just because that protection from black and green is so good in Commander. It doesn't see a lot of play anymore. In this deck, it's going to be fantastic. Again, we have Elishnorn, so if this guy's a 4/4 double strike, that's a lot of damage, right? And we want to rely more on actually just closing out the game via damage, so that's why he's in this deck. Also have Celestial Crusader, again, another pump effect. Also has Flash. I have a lot of Flash effects in the Sigrid deck. We're going to be playing more on our opponent's turns in the Sigrid deck because we are going to be holding up mana all the time in case we want to cast our Sigrid. So a guy like this, Celestial Crusader, it's got split second, so it can't be countered, and it's going to pump all our creatures. Martyr's Bond, this is a card that, again, you could put it in any mono-white deck. I didn't have it in the Reidane deck just because there isn't a lot of creatures, and typically you're going to use this like you would a Grave Pact, and we have a lot more creatures in our Sigrid deck, so that's going to affect our opponents a lot more. You know, if you've never seen this card before, you've never used it, this is any permanent, okay? Non-land permanent, right? So if someone destroys an artifact of ours, everyone has to sack an artifact. If someone destroys an enchantment of ours, everyone has to everyone has to sacrifice an enchantment. It's a fantastic, fantastic card. And I also put Balancing Act in both decks. This is a card I've been wanting to use for a while. We're not going to have a ton of permanents in either deck. This is a little more Staxy. You know, you can use this if you want or not. You know, I've gone over this a ton. I like making mono-white decks. White's one of my favorite colors. It really gets a bad rap in Commander. And this is why, because people don't like when you play effects like Balancing Act, but that's the kind of cards that, no pun intended, balances the game out for white. Everyone else is going nuts. You know, green's ramping like crazy and blue's drawing cards like crazy, and everyone's complaining about all the things they can do. You know, oh, green's too powerful or blue's too powerful. White needs more card draw. But yet I play a card like Balancing Act, which evens things out, and then everyone complains about that. You know, like this is what you want to even things out. This is how you do it. You cast a card like Balancing Act, and your opponent who has 50 lands in play has to sacrifice a bunch, and the blue player who has 20 cards in hand has to discard down to like 5 or 6, right? So play this if you want. I'm going to put it in both my Reidane and Sigrid deck. You can take it out if your friends are going to freak out when you play it. Do whatever you like. So that is Reidane and Sigrid. For me personally, right now I really like Reidane. But I also really like the fact that everyone thinks Sigrid is horrible and unplayable, which makes me want to make a Sigrid deck more. I'm going to play both. I'm going to play both a few times, see which one I like more, and probably I'll just end up keeping one of them, most likely. But if you have any interest in playing either of these, I hope this video helped. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in.